What? I asked, somewhat annoyed. Dalton, can we talk? Diana asked. I put down the paperwork and followed her outside and around the corner from the ambulance garage. What are you doing? She demanded. What do you mean, what am I doing? I'm helping get the ambulance back in service. Yeah, I can see that. But why? Because the call is over and it's time to go home, I said. You need to get back in there and be with her, Dalton. Her parents will be here any minute now, and she's got plenty of other family and friends who can take care of her from here on out. Bullshit. You know damned well that she needs you more than she needs anyone else right now, Dalton. Don't deny it. What the hell do you want me to do? What I want is for you to man up, Dalton. All of us saw what happened in the back of that ambulance on the way in here. The best thing you could have done for her today is exactly what you did. Just be there for her. Holding her like that was the best medicine she could have gotten today. Well, I did it. Now it's time to go home. Diana said. You don't get off that easy. What more do you expect? Dalton, you're part of the reason for why this happened. Bullshit. I do not accept that. And you have no business trying to dump that on my head. Oh God, I don't control Randy Jones. Oh, come off it, Dalton. You and Danny beat the living shit out of Randy and his friends a few weeks ago. They all get charged with assault, public intox, and disorderly conduct while you guys get off scot-free. Then today, Randy finds out he's gonna get fired if he doesn't show up to his job tonight. But he can't leave because he's out on bail and can't cross state lines. He sees you as the root of his problems, and he automatically makes a connection to you through Darla. Are you getting it yet? Yes, I get it, Diana. But that doesn't make any of this my fault. It might not be all your fault, Dalton, but you can't deny that you have some responsibility for this. Oh, yeah? Well, if you want to put it that way, then this can all be traced back to the day when Darla left me bawling my eyes out in front of my own house when I had to watch her and the kids pack up and leave so she could run off with Randy again. Diana tried to compose herself. Yes, I know, Dalton. I know she hurt you. Hell, we were all disappointed when she decided to go back to Randy. None of us could believe it. We all hurt for you too, Dalton. But all of that is water under the bridge. You saw what he did to her today. You saw what a monster he is. Yes, it is all a chain reaction of events, but you're a link in that chain. You have a responsibility to her, Dalton, and right now she needs you more than anything. I have to go back, Diana. I still have a report to write on this and... Oh, for shit's sake, Dalton. Give me the paperwork. I can write a stupid patient care report as well as anybody. I know your password to the computer. I'll just type it up and sign your name. Okay? I just turned and shook my head. If I didn't get out of there, I was going to explode. Screw it. Let's just go. I can always come back later. I turned around and walked back into the garage. It was obvious that Jake, Misty, and Meg had all been listening to the whole conversation. They just stood there looking at me, disapproving. I stood there as the four of them piled back into the ambulance. I took a seat in the front passenger seat. Jake was about to turn the key when he paused for a few moments. On second thought, he said, I think I'll ride in the back with the girls. And he got out from behind the wheel and jumped in the back with Meg, Diana, and Misty. I sat there dumbfounded for a few minutes. They were all pissed at me and were letting me know it. I got out and walked around to the other side of the ambulance, hopped in and turned the key. It was kind of awkward driving with the splint on my right hand, but I could manage. Anybody want to stop for a beverage or food on the way back? It was customary to grab something after a run to Red River Falls. But the dead silence I was greeted with was answer enough. I could have used a nice cold Coke right about then, but there was no sense looking like a bigger a-hole and stopping for one. Besides, they all probably would have left me there if I didn't make sure to take the keys in with me. Needless to say, it was an extremely quiet 40-minute ride back to Royal Fork. I helped restock the ambulance in absolute silence along with everyone. As soon as that was finished, Meg, Diana, Misty, and Jake all disappeared like four farts in a whirlwind and left me alone at the fire station to finish the run report. I got home another half hour later and grabbed a beer from the fridge, effectively ensuring I would not be answering any more EMS calls that night. It was for the best, anyway, given the way my co-volunteers on Royal Fork Fire and Rescue obviously looked at me. I slumped into my favorite recliner and flipped on the tube, hoping to catch the Twins or Red Sox game. But even with the noise of the TV and a cold beer in my hand, nothing could allow me to escape the reality that my house was somehow even emptier than it was when Darla and the kids left. I began to wonder if the day would ever come when I didn't feel like an a-hole anymore. My phone rang early the next morning. It was one of those mornings where I just didn't want to get up, but I begrudgingly reached over and picked up the receiver. Hello? Dalton? Yeah. Who's this? This is Cecilia. Ah shit. Hi, Cecilia, I said, sitting up in bed. How are you? I am fine, Dalton, but I'm not the one you should be worried about. Oh, right. How's Darla? I asked, taking the bait. She has surgery scheduled for this morning. She asked me to call you and see if you could be there. Surgery? Surgery for what? Randy really did a number on her wrist. He managed to break it in 3 places when he stomped on her with his steel toe work boots. They scheduled her for 10 o'clock. I ran my hand over my face in frustration. Well, I'm not really sure I can make it by then, I said, glancing at the clock. Dalton, Cecilia said, sounding stern, Darla really needs you there. You're the one man who has ever stood up for her. I'm also the reason she got the shit beat out of her yesterday, Cecilia. I can only imagine how pissed you and Butch are at me right now. Stop it, Dalton. Get off your pity pot right now. Randy has deserved to get his butt kicked for years. I'm surprised it took this long. You might have been a part of what led up to this, but you did not force Randy to do what he did. That was his decision. Now what the hell time can we expect to see you? I let out a sigh of frustration. Let me get cleaned up and grab some coffee and breakfast. I'll be over there as soon as I can. Thanks, Dalton. This will mean a lot to her. I know. I hung up and proceeded to grab a shower, which was a lot easier these days with the splint on my right hand that I could just take on and off instead of that damned plaster cast I had for 3 weeks after I rearranged Randy Jones's face. It was almost 9 o'clock by the time I got on the road. I figured Darla's hand must have been really screwed up if they were so concerned about it that they were willing to schedule surgery for a Saturday morning. Hopefully, there wouldn't be too much nerve damage or circulation damage, and she'd eventually regain the use of her hand fully. I got to the hospital too late to see Darla before they took her back to pre-op. Cecilia said Darla was disappointed I wasn't there yet, but seemed happy when Cecilia told her I was on my way. Maybe part of me was subconsciously procrastinating and avoiding having to see her. The surgery took about an hour and a half. I sat in the surgery waiting room as Cecilia and Butch went back to see her when she made it back to recovery. They were in there for about 20 minutes when Cecilia came out and asked me if I'd like to come back and see her. No, I don't think so. I'll be fine waiting out here. It's fine, Dalton. They only allow 2 at a time. Anyway, you and Butch can spend some time with her back there. I know it would mean a lot to her to know you were here. If I go back there to see her, Cecilia, I'd kind of like to see her alone, you know? I understand, she nodded. She ended up going back to the recovery area and she and Butch emerged a few minutes later. Go on back, Dalton, Butch said. She's still pretty out of it, but she'll at least know you're there. I kind of half hoped they wouldn't be back for a while. Truthfully, I should have just taken the opportunity to leave when they went back to see her in the first place. But I got up and walked through the double doors and was greeted by the nurse who led me to the recovery room. I was probably lucky to see her at all, as many hospitals don't let visitors see patients in the recovery room. Darla was still sleeping. They had managed to skillfully close the gaping wound above her left eye. Hopefully, you wouldn't be able to see the scar as it should almost blend in with her eyebrow. The large hole in her bottom lip where her tooth had punctured was neatly closed. Also, her right hand and wrist were wrapped in an ace bandage with some kind of soft splint in place. I'm sure a cast would be put on in the coming days. Ironic, in a twisted way, that we should both happen to have injuries to our right hands. I stood there for almost 20 minutes just staring at her battered little body. There was a time when I lusted after her 5 feet and 1 inch of curves and sex appeal. I could imagine all kinds of ways to worship that small altar of passion and lust. But now, just the simple act of reaching down and tenderly holding her hand sent a cold shiver through my body, and I immediately let go for fear of somehow inflicting further injury on her. As I did so, Darla briefly stirred and asked who was there. I said nothing and decided it was time to go. I couldn't look upon her for one more minute because of the knowledge that I had helped put her there. Tears began streaming down my face, not of sadness, but shame. I walked back out to the waiting area and found Butch and Cecilia still sitting there. They asked if anything was wrong and I said no. I fibbed and told them that she was stirring a bit and asking for them. They both smiled and said, "Thanks," and immediately got up and started heading back to the recovery room. I was just about to the end of the hall and had just punched the elevator call button when I heard Butch behind me. "Dalton, wait up a second." I turned and saw him rushing to approach. "Dalton, I just wanted to say that Cecilia and I really appreciate everything you've done for Darla." "Yeah, right," I said, fighting tears again. "What the hell's that supposed to mean?" The elevator opened. "It means," I said, stepping inside, "that I'm half the reason for why she isn't here in the first place." Much to my surprise, Butch stepped inside with me. "Now you listen to me, Dalton. This is not your fault." "Yes, it is, Butch. I'm surprised you and Cecilia can even stand to look at me right now. I let Randy goad me into a fight, and he went and took it out on Darla." "Yeah, he did, Dalton. But you're the first one that's ever stood up to that little scumsucker. He knows damned well that you're not going to take any of his shit. If I was 25 years younger and in better health, I would have done it myself." "My friend's boss was right," I said, shaking my head. "He even warned me this would happen. I just didn't listen." The elevator opened on the main level and I started walking to the front entrance with Butch following close. Cecilia and I tried like hell to talk Darla out of even going on a date with that little turd, but she wouldn't listen. I know as well as anyone how stubborn Darla can be, but I also know for a fact that if you give her another chance, she'll never let you down again, Dalton. "I don't, Butch. I think I've caused enough damage. I think it's time to just fade back into the woodwork." I turned towards him, shook his hand quickly, and started speed walking to my car. Butch, with his bad hip, could never keep up. Darla got out of the hospital the following day. The only reason they kept her another night was because her blood pressure was a little low following the surgery. She ended up going back to her parents' house and staying with them for a few days. The problem was nobody seemed to know where Randy Jones was. An all-points bulletin had been released along with a bolo. "Be on the lookout" for his vehicle. Everyone had decided it was in Darla's best interest to find a safer place to stay. Callahan Manufacturing was gracious enough to give her a leave of absence until she got all of her affairs in order. She wouldn't be paid, unfortunately, but she at least wouldn't lose her job. Darla and the kids ended up moving into the Karen Cumberland house a few weeks later, which was a modern state-of-the-art secure women's shelter in Red River Falls. The place had complete video monitoring of the entire outside and interior of the building with panic alarms placed sporadically throughout the facility, so a resident of the shelter could press one and immediately call law enforcement without needing to dial 911. Any panic alarm would send law enforcement rushing to the scene and know the exact area of the building in which the alarm originated. Heavy reinforced doors and bullet-resistant windows made the place nearly as secure as a prison, with the exception that it was designed to keep the bad guys out instead of in. There was also a secure room at the entrance where visitors could wait for a resident, and they could be searched prior to entering the facility. I had gone back to work at the fire department shortly after Darla, and the kids had moved into the Cumberland house. My hands still hurt from time to time, but I could still easily lift patients and perform all of my paramedic skills with little to no problems. I had pretty much avoided Darla since she got out of the hospital. Mostly, it was because it still hurt too much to see her because she left me, but it was also because of increasing acceptance of my part of the blame for her getting hurt. I still tried to deflect responsibility when people called me out on it. I'm not really sure how much face I thought I was saving with people. I guess I just didn't want them to think I was a bigger a-hole than necessary. Eventually, I found the backbone to go see her, and I drove over to the Cumberland house after one of my shift at work. I brought along some gifts for Natalie and Nathan and a nice bouquet of flowers for Darla. I stayed away from the roses and went heavy on the carnations. I'm not sure what sentiment I was trying to avoid expressing, but it just felt like the thing to do at the time. I walked in the front entrance and rang the buzzer at the security door. A small opening, similar to a mail drop slot, opened, and I could see the eyes of an African-American woman staring back at me. I also knew that someone inside could see me on the video camera as well, so she probably knew I wasn't brandishing a weapon before she opened the slot. What you want? She demanded in a thick, urban accent. I'd like to see Darla Jones, if possible, I sheepishly replied. Darla know you's looking for her? Well, no, not really. You's posed to call ahead if you wants to see somebody, she warned. Oh, I see. I am sorry. I guess I can come back then. Can I just leave the flowers and gifts with you? She ignored my question. What kind of uniform is dat you's wearing? My uniform? Well, I work for the Red River Falls Fire Department. Fire department? You kinda look like the people. I laughed. No, I'm definitely not a cop. See here? I asked, pointing to the patch on my right sleeve. That's the patch of the Red River Falls Fire Department. She mumbled. You still look like the police. What yo name, anyways? Dalton. Dalton Anderson. Wait right, dear, she said as she closed the slot. I could hear her call out on the intercom system. Hey, Darla Jones. Dey is some firemen here for ya. Kinda cute for a white boy, too. I'm sure my face turned beet red as I could hear women holler out catcalls and whistles at the announcement. Soon, I heard a loud buzzing coming from the door indicating that it was momentarily unlocked, and I proceeded to let myself in. There on the other side stood Darla. She looked terrific. Well, she at least looked a hell of a lot better than the last time I saw her. There was just a slight scar above her left eyebrow and a slight one below her bottom lip where the tooth had punctured. All of the bruising to her cheeks and neck were gone, and the only other visible reminder of her ordeal was the removable cast still in place to her right forearm. Hi, I breathed, my heart pounding in my chest. Hi, yourself, she said, smiling. We hugged awkwardly and briefly, mostly because of the flowers and the gifts I was carrying, but also because we were unsure of each other. I just thought I'd drop by on my way home from work and say hi to you and the kids, I said, trying to sound casual. That's so sweet, Dalton. They've really missed you, she said. We all have, she added, visibly fidgeting with her hands. Can we go see the kids? I have some presents for them. Sure. They'll be thrilled. They're upstairs in the playroom. Darla led me out into the great room, which covered a lot of the main level of the building. She explained that the great room served as kind of a multi-purpose facility and was also served as the dining room. The kitchen was a commercial one, and all of the shelter residents assisted in preparing meals. The shelter's business offices were also located on this level. We passed through another set of secure doors as Darla led me upstairs to the second floor, which is where the residences were located. Some were single rooms with only one occupant, and many others had multiple rooms in a single residence, which were reserved for those women who brought children to the shelter. Darla's residence consisted of 2 small bedrooms and a small common room and a small bathroom. It was only about 20 feet long by 10 feet wide, but she said it was more than comfortable for the 3 of them. We passed through yet another set of secure doors to get to the 3rd level, which contained more residential rooms and a large activity area for the children to play in. As Darla led me to the play area, both Natalie and Nathan shrieked, "Dalton!" and came running for me. I hugged them as though I was never going to see them again and immediately got a lump in my throat. The kids gave me the grand tour of their play area and told me how much fun they were having at the Cumberland house. I was happy for them, in a sense, as they were thrilled that there were so many other children to play with. But I also couldn't help but take note of the obvious fact there were, indeed, so many children there, as well as the fact that the shelter was filled nearly to capacity. I had been there for nearly 2 hours when Darla was called away to begin helping the other women prepare lunch. The shelter did have 2 full-time cooks on staff, but the women staying at the shelter were also expected to help out with preparing the meals, too, as well as daily cleaning of the facility. Most of them were only too happy to do it as it helped pass the time and gave them something to think about other than domestic violence. Darla and the kids insisted that I stay for lunch. I suppose I have to admit that if it was just Darla asking, I probably would have said no and gone about my business. But Natalie and Nathan were so excited to have me there that I couldn't refuse them. The kids each sat on one side of me and literally talked nonstop throughout lunch. Darla just sat across the table from me and mostly ate in silence as she watched me with the kids. She had a bit of a wistful look on her face, and her eyes were moist with tears that she refused to let fall down her cheeks. I couldn't get over how much better she looked than the last time I had seen her, and yet, Something was definitely off with her, as well. Visiting her in the shelter was neither the time nor the place to have a big talk. And frankly, I didn't know if there was really much more to talk about. But there was one big piece of news that I did have to tell her, and I wanted to wait until it was time to leave before I said anything. But first, I had to pry myself away from Natalie and Nathan, who continually begged me to stay just a little bit longer. Finally, I said my goodbyes to the kids as Darla shooed them back upstairs to the playroom. They were grumpy about it at first, but soon were immersed in playing with their friends and showing the toys that I had given them. An American Girl doll for Natalie and a small train set for Nathan. Darla led me back to the secured front entrance, and, as I was leaving, it dawned on me how much of a microscope I had been under the entire time I was there. Every woman in the place had their eyes glued on me from the moment I walked in. Some of them eyed me with no small amount of fear and mistrust, while the others looked at me with pure lust. Kind of felt like a slab of beef at times in there, I said as Darla walked me to the front door. Even though they have been through some terrible times, they still appreciate a good-looking man when they see one. They're still women, after all. But they also know a good-hearted man when they see one, too. Guess I'm not used to that kind of attention. Yeah, well, they've heard a lot about you, Dalton, Darla said. All good, I hope. I laughed sheepishly. Like I could ever hope to tell them anything different, Dalton. You're one of the few examples of good men that a lot of these women have ever seen. And I've done plenty of bragging about you ever since the kids and I moved in here, she said, looking down. I knew she was looking for a response, but I couldn't think of one. But suddenly, I remembered what I was supposed to tell her. Oh shit, I almost forgot the reason I came over here. Wasn't it to see me and the kids? She giggled. No, yes, but the original reason I wanted to stop by was to tell you that Danny called me this morning. Okay, what did he want? He called to tell me that Randy got arrested last night, up in Kalispell, Montana. Did you know he has a sister up there? Yes, his sister Rhonda lives up there. Darla was suddenly ecstatic, and I couldn't help but notice how much more beautiful she was when she was happy. Well, believe it or not, his sister was the one who called the police and turned him in. She ended up doing a silent 911 call where she dialed but didn't answer. Randy had gone to sleep thinking he was in a safe place, but then his sister was waiting for the cops at the front door, and she led them right into his room. Oh my God, that's fantastic. That is so totally just like Rhonda to do something like that too. Out of Randy's family, Rhonda was the one I was probably the closest to. I'm sure she was none too happy when she found out what he did. Yeah, I suppose not, I said, suddenly finding myself staring into her eyes. I forced myself to break my gaze. But yeah, anyway, I just wanted to let you know that they found him and he's finally in custody. Thank you so much, Dalton, she said, with that soft glow in her eyes again. And thank you for everything you've done for me and the kids. We couldn't have gotten through this without you. I scoffed. Darla, let's be honest. You wouldn't have gotten into this mess if it wasn't for me. Dalton, don't. I don't need you to feel sorry for me. I'm a big girl. I can take ownership of my choices and responsibility for my mistakes. I stood there silent for a few moments. Well, anyway, I better get going. Thanks for letting me see the kids. I had a great time. I pulled Darla in for a hug, putting my hands on her shoulders only. I figured it would be less threatening and also made it easier to pull away. Darla stood there and watched me leave, looking disappointed and crestfallen. She knew the truth as well as I did. I was running away. One benefit of Randy's arrest was that Darla was able to petition the judge for an immediate divorce, since they had only delayed the divorce proceedings when Randy had attempted to become husband and father of the year. Now that he was wanted for assault, battery, and interstate flight, as well as the drunk and disorderly charge and public intoxication charge from the night I had knocked his teeth in, Randy was probably going to become a convicted felon soon. As expected, he had also been fired from his lucrative welding job with the oil company up north. The public defenders in Mason County weren't that good that they could do much with the charges, which meant that Randy was likely going to spend some quality and lengthy time way down in Sioux Falls. Darla and the kids only stayed at the Cumberland house for about another month. Randy was being held without bail, which was unusual for anything other than homicide cases. But he had already proven himself to be a flight risk and was determined to be a further risk to Darla and the kids. Butch and Cecilia insisted that Darla and the kids move back in with them. Butch had even single-handedly built 2 bedrooms in the basement for the kids, along with a nice family room and rec room down there, and had updated and remodeled Darla's old bedroom. It had been nearly 2 months since I had seen Darla and the kids. It was a Friday night and I was doing ambulance standby for the high school football game in Royal Fork. It was early autumn, but unseasonably warm for the time of year. I was working with the usual gang of suspects that night with Jake, Meg, Diana, and Misty on our crew. We had brought along lawn chairs as we sat next to the ambulance waiting for one of the players to get hurt, but hoping and praying that none of them did. The Royal Fork Raiders were down by a touchdown early, but were driving towards the end zone. I could see a smile break out simultaneously on Meg, Diana, and Misty's faces, but it wasn't because of the ball game. Jake Herman just stood up with his jaw dropping. I looked to my left and saw what they were all gawking at. My heart nearly stopped and time suddenly stood still. Darla was sauntering casually over our direction. She was wearing a sleeveless knee-length denim western cut dress and a pair of ankle-high cowboys boots. The belt she wore loosely around her waist made the dress perfectly accentuate her hips. The vision of her approaching made her look like the star of a Miranda Lambert music video. She approached our group and Meg, Diana, and Misty all exchanged hellos with her. Jake still sat there dumbfounded. "I could sure use a Coke," Diana said. "Me too," chimed Meg. "I think I'll go along too," added Misty. Jake continued to sit there drooling. "Jake, let's go get a drink," Diana demanded. "Nah, I'm all right," Jake said, oblivious. "Jake, you're thirsty. Get your butt over here and get a pop." Jake finally snapped out of it and begrudgingly walked away and somehow managed to still stare at Darla nearly the entire trip to the concession stand. I returned my attention to the game as Darla sat down in Diana's chair next to me. "Boy, I'll give you one thing," I said. "You and the girls sure know how to ambush a guy. I had to get your attention somehow, Dalton." I sighed. "What's the point?" "You know damned well what the point is, Dalton. How long are we going to keep avoiding one another? How long until we finally clear the air?" "I'm not avoiding anyone, Darla. As far as I'm concerned, there's really nothing else to say. We tried something. It didn't work. You went back to Randy. That didn't work. Now you're single, and I'm single. We're both free to pursue whatever we want." "Really? That's it? It's that simple?" "Well, Darla, it sure seemed simple enough the day you left. I wanted you to stay and talk that day, and you didn't. And I wanted you to stay the night before and talk to me, but instead, you ran off and spent the night getting drunk over at Danny's house." I scoffed. "Don't blow me off, Dalton. Damn it, we both keep making the exact same mistakes as the other person and then think we have the right to punish the other person for the same mistake we made. It's time to put an end to that, Dalton. It's time to start with a clean slate." I laughed out loud. "Really? You think after everything that happened, we can just pretend that it didn't happen? Just start over from scratch? Come on, Darla. Surely you, of all people, can't be that naive." "I'm not naive, Dalton. And no, I'm not going to pretend that all the crap over the last 5 months didn't happen. But the only way we can truly get past it is to actually sit down and do the one thing we never did from the beginning but should have. Talk." I shook my head. "There's nothing to talk about." "Bullshit. You want to know what I think? I think you still have feelings for me, Dalton. I think you still have feelings for me, and that scares the shit out of you. It scares the shit out of me, too, Dalton, because I know that I still have feelings for you. The difference is that I'm not too big of a coward to actually face up to it." "Oh, horse shit, Darla. I am not a coward. I go into burning buildings for a living. I pull people out of mangled cars. I do a lot of stuff for a living that most people either can't do or won't do for a living." "Then prove it." "How? And why?" "By actually having the courage to finally sit down face to face with me and getting all of our shit out in the open once and for all." The crowd suddenly roared as Royal Fork scored a touchdown and would tie the game with an extra point. We let the lull in the conversation last until Royal Fork got ready to kick off to their opponent. At that point, Darla stood up. "Do you work tomorrow, Dalton?" "No," I said, grumbling. "Back on shift again on Sunday. I'm going to be at your house tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp, Dalton. I expect you to be there awake, dressed, and ready to talk." You might think to have coffee ready. Darla turned and walked back over to the main bleacher area, presumably where her parents and friends were sitting. Her dad, Butch, is as rabid a football fan as you'll find. There seemed to be just a little bit more of a sway in Darla's hips as she sashayed back to the bleachers. My God, but she looked amazing in that little dress. Those killer curves were on full display for anyone who cared to look, along with her ample cleavage. "Miss us?" Diana asked, sarcastically, as the four of them returned to the ambulance. "Like a bad headache," was my acerbic reply. "You gals really know how to put on the full court press, don't you?" "Only when we need to." "Yeah, well you can ease up. Not gonna do much good anyway." "Jesus, you're dense, Dalton. What's it gonna hurt to just talk to the poor girl?" "What's it gonna help?" "Maybe you," she said. "I'm not saying everything is going to be rainbows and unicorns, Dalton, but maybe you can at least start over. Or else maybe you can have a clean break and at least not hate each other." "I don't hate her." "Well, you have a funny way of showing it. I thought I did okay during the ambulance ride. There's more to it than just putting band-aids on boo-boos, Dalton." "Yeah, well I wish there was a band they could put on my heart then." I got up and headed for the concession stand for a Coke of my own and let Diana ponder the thought. I slept very little that night knowing that Darla and I were going to have it out in a few hours. By 6 o'clock, I was pretty much awake and running on full adrenaline. I had seen the woman naked, for God's sake, and yet I had never been this nervous around her in the entire time I had known her. Apparently, she was eager to get it going too, because she showed up and let herself in right at 7:50. "Most people knock," I said, mildly annoyed at her sense of liberty. "Yeah, well, I'm not most people." "I'll give you that," I said, handing her a mug of coffee. "Cheers," I said in a mock toast. Darla sat down at the table, cupping the mug in her hands. I could tell she was just as tense as I was. We both knew that what was said over the next few minutes or hours would probably solidify whatever type of relationship we would have with one another for the rest of our lives. While I was fairly certain, at that point, that it would most likely end with us being anything other than a couple, I was also worried that we might come out of it not even being friends, even friends from a distance. "Well, I started. You wanted to talk. Why don't you go ahead and start?" She took a few moments to compose herself. Her voice was quiet and meek. She had actually gotten quite sassy and brassy towards the end of our dating relationship, right up until she went back to Randy, who violently put her back in what he thought was her place. "Dalton, what I mean is, take your time, Darla. We have all day." The tears started flowing, though she wasn't full-blown crying. I half rolled my eyes as it seemed to be just another ploy at screwing with my emotions. But as she got going, I realized it was no act. "Dalton, I am sorry. I am so sorry for everything. All of this is my fault, and I'm not just saying that to try to get you to feel sorry for me. Everything that happened since I left this house has happened because I allowed it to. I allowed Randy to get back into my head. I allowed him to manipulate me. I allowed myself to get taken in because I allowed myself to fall back into something familiar, even though the unfamiliar future I had with you was so much better." "That doesn't make any sense, Darla," I said, confused. She took a deep breath. "All my life, Dalton, men have been attracted to me. My entire life. It started when I was a little girl, about 8 or 9. An older boy in our neighborhood started taking an interest in me. He was 15. He showed me a lot of attention, and I thought it was just because he liked me. Late one night, my father caught that boy looking into my bedroom window. My father never told me exactly what he was doing outside my window, but I have a pretty good idea. Needless to say, my father was furious. He took that kid and literally dragged him 2 blocks back to his house. My dad was screaming and the kid was bawling his head off. Dad told the kid's parents that if he ever caught him anywhere near our house again that he'd gouge out his eyeballs and run him lengthwise down the big table saw at the lumber yard. Suffice it to say, I started getting a lot of attention from the boys early on. And it wasn't always the kind of attention I wanted. Other girls hated me because I was more developed than they were and got most of the attention from the boys, which was only made worse being in a small town. Most of the boys only liked me because of my appearance. They didn't like me as a person. They never wanted to get to know the real me. They only liked what they saw. Every time I went out with a boy, every single time. As soon as we were out of view of any adults, their hands made a beeline for my jugs. It got to the point that I hated everyone. Boys, girls, adults. It didn't matter. At one point, Dalton, I seriously thought about taking my own life. I used to fantasize about how good it would be not to have to feel sad, humiliated, threatened, or ashamed. Then Randy came along in high school. He said all the right things, and he did all the right things. He got me to let my guard down. I didn't realize at the time that what he was doing was manipulating me. He definitely took his time. But Randy was only after the same thing that everyone else was. He didn't love me for me. He just wanted a toy that he could control. He made so many promises and broke every single one. He would tell me that other men would only ever want me so they could just use my body, and that he was the only one that ever loved me. By the time I knew any different, Dalton, I was already married and had 2 kids and a future that looked bleaker every day. Randy always promised that things would get better, but with every job he'd lose or not get hired for, he started drinking more and more. Pretty soon, the insults started, and then he started yelling and blaming me and the kids for all his problems. He'd leave and get drunk with his friends and be gone for days at a time. He'd come home all liquored up and start slapping me around. I would literally have to hide the kids in the apartment or hide them at one of the neighbors just to keep them away from their dad when he was acting like that. I came over and sat down across from her at the table. I know all about your history with Randy, Darla. You've told me how he treated you in the past. But what does that have to do with us? It has to do with us, Dalton, because I have a long history of making bad choices. It got to the point where that was the only kind of love I knew. Because no matter how drunk he got, he would always eventually sober up for a while and tell me how much he loved me. He'd be fine for a while until his next big disappointment came along or his next failure. So why stay with him? It's because I was never strong enough to leave. I never understood, either, why women don't just leave their deadbeat or abusive men. The screwed up part is, you don't even see yourself that way when you're in the relationship. You try so hard to focus on the good parts of the marriage. If not for yourself, then for your kids. You think that abuse only happens to other people and not you. And then you don't even recognize it when it is happening to you. So, what do you want to happen? What is your expectation from here on out? What I want to happen, Dalton, is for me to start making good choices in my life instead of the shitty ones. I want to make the good choice of getting rid of Randy, once and for all. And I got a big jump on that when my lawyer petitioned the judge for an immediate dissolution of my marriage. Randy is in jail and is probably going to be there for a long time, so he is not an immediate threat. Okay, I guess that's a start. What's next? Next, Dalton, I want to make the choice to have you as part of my life. Ideally, I'd love for us to be together romantically, but I'll even settle for just being your friend, even if I have to watch you have a relationship with another woman from afar. But Darla, you already had me in your life once, and you still went back to Randy. So I have 2 questions for you. First, what assurances do I have that you're not going to make another shitty decision in the future and either go back to Randy or run off with some other a-hole? And second, why me? Now that you're single, you could probably get just about any guy in Royal Fork or even Red River Falls or pretty much any guy in Mason County and beyond. First of all, Dalton, Randy is history. He will never bother me or my children again. Even if he gets out of prison and somehow manages to gain some kind of visitation with the kids, he will still never lay a hand on us in anger. And just in case he does, my father gave me a little present when the kids and I came home from the Cumberland house. She reached in her purse and drew out a Taurus snub nose .38 revolver. Whoa, God, okay. Okay, put it away. What's the matter, Dalton? Afraid of a little lady pistol? She giggled. See what I mean? If Randy ever comes anywhere near me again, he's gonna change from a rooster to a hen with one shot. I'm not going to shoot to kill. I will shoot to maim. Yeah, okay there, Annie Oakley. Go ahead and put the gun away, okay? Fine, she said, tucking it away. But one of our dates in the future is going to be spending a day at the shooting range. Dad took me there a few weeks ago, and I gotta say I'm hooked. So, I said, switching gears, what makes you so sure we're going to date? Are you sure I can even compete with Randy? Especially since he is so well endowed and you're absolutely crazy over his tool. What? Why in the hell would you say something like that? Because he told me that at the restaurant that night. The same night I beat the shit out of him. Darla burst out into a fit of uncontrollable laughter. It was several minutes before she was calm enough to even continue our conversation. Oh my God, that is the funniest thing I have ever heard in my life. I can't believe you guys are so obsessed with your tools. And the hilarious part is that you're almost a half-foot larger than Randy is, Dalton. What the hell does that have to do with anything? I'll be blunt and explain it to you, Dalton, she said, trying to get under control. Only because I care about you so damned much. Randy has absolutely nothing on you in this department. Trust me when I tell you that you are bigger in every way. Whatever Randy said to you was an absolute lie, and just to piss you off. Dalton. I wasn't sure how to respond to the compliment, and I sounded like a puss when I said, yeah, well, it still pissed me off. Come on, Dalton, she said, more serious. Please just give me another chance. We'll take it slow, I promise. I'll work my bum off to regain and build up your trust. I'll do whatever it takes, babe, I promise. To answer the second part of your question, don't want any other guy in Royal Fork. Or any other place, for that matter. I want you. I deserve you. Deserve me? Yes, I deserve you. For too long I settled for what everyone else thought I should get. I settled for what everyone else thought I deserved. Guys like you, Dalton, were never in my league. Oh, that is so not true. I scoffed. You're just another example of why good guys always finish last. Yes, it is true. You're the kind of guy most girls want. Some of us only go for the bad boys because we never see ourselves having a shot with the good guys. I was always too afraid. I just assumed that all of the guys were the same, and because I was never around anyone decent, I never got to know guys like you. I just assumed you wouldn't go for a girl like me. All the other girls portrayed me as a bitch. I never figured I had a shot with someone like you. And during the time we were together before, Dalton, I was always afraid that it was going to end. What did I ever do to give you that impression? Don't you see how unfair that is to me? You automatically assumed the worst about me. I know. I didn't say it was fair, Dalton. I just said that it was how I was thinking at the time. I don't even know myself that well, to tell you the truth. I don't really even know what kind of movies I like, or what kind of music I like, or even what kind of food I really like. When I panic, I just go for something familiar. That's how I ended up back with Randy. Okay, I said, incredulous. How is it possible that you don't know any of that stuff after 20-some years? Because whenever we went to the movies, we always just went and saw what Randy liked. Whenever we listened to the radio, we listened to whatever Randy liked. Whenever we went out to eat, we just ate wherever Randy wanted to eat. The truth be told, Dalton, I don't think I even like your spaghetti all that well. I just eat it because the kids like it, and I didn't want to upset you. Ouch, that hurt. Really? You don't like my spaghetti? Not really, she said, half crying. I'm really sorry, Dalton. Suddenly, it all made sense. Everything was starting to take shape. Here was a woman who for years had tried to make everyone but herself happy. She was a woman whose sense of value and self-worth was tied entirely to what those around her thought of her. If Randy and the kids were happy, she was happy. If everyone else around her was satisfied, she was satisfied. If Randy thought she was beautiful, then she felt beautiful. If he called her a bitch and a 304, then she probably figured she was a bitch and a 304. Although, to be honest, I doubt she ever stepped out on Randy the entire time they were married, even though no one would probably have blamed her if she did. Darla Jones was literally a blank canvas, and for the first time in her life, she and she alone had the opportunity to decide what the colors and shapes of her life would be. As someone once told me a long time ago, a ship is useless if it is dragging an anchor, and so the anchor must be cut loose. Not because the anchor is worthy, but because the ship is. It was time for Darla to set her own course for the future, and she could do that now because Randy was gone for good. She had gotten a taste of her freedom when we were together before and had a deeper appreciation now that she knew for certain that Randy had nothing to offer her or the children. Maybe I'm a chump, or a sap, or a big old softy. Maybe I'm just kitty whipped. I don't really know. Do you like Chinese at least? Chinese? Dalton. I don't even know if I like hamburgers or hot dogs better, she said, wiping away her tears. Well, We better figure it out then, because I absolutely love Chinese food. Where are Natalie and Nathan? They're at Mom and Dad's. Why? Well, let's go get him. Where are we going? She asked as I got up and grabbed a jacket. We're going on a field trip. What kind of field trip? A field trip to discover the real Darla Jones. We got into my Taurus and drove over to Butch and Cecilia's to pick up the kids. While we were there, I made Darla run in and pack an overnight bag for herself and for the kids. I still had my work duffel in the car, so I already had a change of clothes. I did make sure that we had swimsuits along, though. Natalie and Nathan were ecstatic about the impromptu mini vacation. We headed east and eventually caught I-94 and followed it all the way into the Twin Cities. I kept the destinations a secret, and I had gotten a buddy and co-worker of mine, Neil Boyd, to trade shifts with me so I could have the next day off. I would work the following week for one of Neil's shifts. We got to Minneapolis just before noon and headed south into Bloomington, one of the bigger Twin Cities suburbs. We made our way to the Mall of America. Darla and the kids had never been here before, and I had been over here numerous times, both as a kid when it first opened and later on in life. Like most people, I still call the amusement park Camp Snoopy instead of Nickelodeon Universe. Natalie and Nathan, of course, were practically bouncing off the walls wanting to go on all the rides, but I told them we had to eat first. So we ended up on the top level of the mall in one of the newest restaurants, the Imperial Szechuan Palace, a gourmet Chinese restaurant. The aroma was absolutely intoxicating to me the moment we walked inside. At least it was to me. The Palace, as it is called, offers sit-down dining where you can order off the menu. But during the lunchtime, they also put out the most spectacular buffet you've ever seen in your life. "Oh my God," Darla exclaimed. "I don't have the first clue what to get. Some of it looks delicious, but some of it looks kinda gross too." "Well, why don't you just grab a plate and kind of take small samples of everything and see if there is something you like?" "Okay," she said. I couldn't help but chuckle as I watched her pour over all of the items. There were nearly 50 entrees to choose from. Finally, she picked a few things to try and we all sat down. Natalie and Nathan got a kick out of chicken on a stick and loaded up on crab rangoon, which was absolutely outstanding here. All in all, Darla managed to take and eat bite-sized portions of about 15 different items. But at the end of the day, it was obvious that Chinese food just wasn't going to be her food category of choice. "I am sorry, Dalton. I just don't think it's for me. Everything is just either too spicy for me or way too salty. I know you like this kind of food, but it's just not me." "That's okay," I said. "No, big deal. You're not mad?" I shook my head. Why would I be mad? I mean, aren't you at least glad that you know for sure that you don't like Chinese? It's not a crime if you don't like all the same things as me. Darla responded by reaching across the table and just held my hand. God, it felt good to just look deep into her eyes again. But I knew, for my own good as well as Darla's, that we couldn't rush things. I paid for the meal, and we headed back out onto the concourse again. Since I knew Darla was less than thrilled about the Chinese dinner, I suggested we stop by the A&W food stand and grab some root beer floats, which went over huge with Natalie and Nathan. Darla even ordered some onion rings for herself. "Now these I can definitely say I like," she chuckled. It was good to see her smile again. Little by little, I was immersing myself in the warm feeling of just being with Darla, Natalie, and Nathan again. It was starting to feel almost like a family again, although I didn't want to rush things. We spent the rest of the afternoon taking the kids on just about every ride in the amusement park, right there in the middle of the mall. The kids just couldn't believe that such a fantastic place existed in the world. Natalie was big enough that she could go on just about every ride in the park, with the exception of one or two. Nathan did get a little bit upset that he couldn't go on some of the bigger rides, but I did manage to sneak him into Paul Bunyan's log ride, thanks to the slight chaos of a long line that day. By 6 o'clock, I told everyone it was time to call it a day, which elicited groans of extreme disapproval from the kids. Darla immediately scolded them, telling them they were lucky to be here on a weekend at all. But I also told them that I had another big surprise for them, and we literally drove just a few blocks north and checked into a large suite at the Radisson Hotel, which was also home to the Water Park of America, one of the largest indoor water parks in the Midwest. We all got checked into our suite, which included a king-size bed and sleeper sofa in the main room and a separate bedroom for the kids with a set of bunk beds. We ended up swimming for the rest of the evening until 10 o'clock, which just about gave Darla fits because the kids were used to being in bed by 9 at the latest. Needless to say, the kids were both completely worn out from the long and active day and were asleep almost as soon as their precious heads hit the pillows. Darla objected when I insisted that she sleep in the bed while I took the sleeper sofa. "Dalton, that is absolutely insane. There is more than enough bed here for both of us." "Look," I sighed. "If we're going to reboot this and give it another shot, then I think we should take it slow. I don't want us to blow it twice." "Well then, can I at least get a kiss goodnight?" "Now that I can do." We kissed tenderly and briefly, though Darla tried to lean in for something more passionate. Instead, I just held her in my arms and savored the feeling of how good it felt. Several times I awoke during the night, which apparently roused Darla, too. We stared into each other's eyes and Darla would rub the open space next to her in a silent invitation for me to join her. As tough as it was, I just smiled and jokingly chastised her for trying to break my will. "Can't blame a girl for trying," was her giggling reply. We all slept in late the next morning, and I had even paid for a late checkout. We spent the late morning and afternoon at the Minneapolis Children's Museum. I was initially going to schedule a jump time at one of the Sky Zones, but decided against it as I didn't want to be too worn out to drive home. I decided to save that for a future trip. Besides, we all had a blast with Natalie and Nathan and all of the amazing interactive activities to be done at the Children's Museum. By the time we got back to Royal Fork that night, it was nearly 9 o'clock. Both the kids were fast asleep and had to be carried into Butch and Cecilia's. I felt bad because I knew Darla had to work at Callahan's the next morning. As I got ready to leave, Darla followed me out to my car to see me off. I had barely turned around to tell her good night when she grabbed my shirt and pulled me into the most incredible, steel-melting kiss I had ever received. By now I was too weak to resist, and I just pulled her into me and matched the fervency of her kiss with my own. When she finally let me up for air, all she could breathlessly say was, "Keep going, Dalton. I'll be waiting for you at the finish line." "Huh?" I said, dumbfounded. "You said that nice guys never finish first. I just want you to know that I'm waiting for you, Dalton. No matter how long it takes, I won't give up on you. You deserve to be happy, and so do I. You made me so happy this weekend, Dalton, and I want more. I deserve more." Then she pulled me in for another tongue-lashing kiss, turned away and jogged back into her parents' house and closed the front door behind her. All I could do was to get in my car and drive home. We kept things casual, or at least as casual as we could, minus an awful lot of steamy makeout sessions. Things continued that way through Halloween that year, but by the time Thanksgiving rolled around, Darla and the kids were back living in my house. The fervor and passion of our kissing crossed over into our lovemaking, and the results were absolutely explosive. What I thought had been a good sex life during the first time we lived together absolutely paled in comparison to the sex we enjoyed now. Darla was all I thought about, but not in a possessive or all-consuming way. It simply felt as though we were truly becoming one the way we were supposed to. Maybe God or the fates dictated that we had to take this screwed-up journey to get to this point. I don't really know. Perhaps sometimes we can only appreciate how good things are only after they have gotten really shitty. Kind of like appreciating sunny days after a week straight of storms. "I'd give anything to make those months we were apart disappear," Darla said one night during a late candlelight dinner. "Are you sure?" I asked, taking a bite of my steak. Steak, by the way, was one food we both agreed we loved. "Absolutely. Are you saying you wouldn't?" "No, I'm not saying that. But I just wonder sometimes if it had to happen to make us appreciate what we have all the more. Like some kind of cosmic test. Well, I'm sure I hope like hell it never happens again. I lost you once, Dalton. I pray I never lose you again." "You won't, sweetheart. I love you, Darla." Sometimes I can't hear that enough, Dalton. Because, even to this moment, I still have trouble believing it. I bet if I asked you to name 10 things you love about me, you'd have a hard time coming up with all 10. Is that a challenge? Well, no. I mean, I dunno. I was just saying. I got up from my seat and kneeled down on the floor next to her and took her hands in mine. "Darla, I love you. I think I have since I first met you. I love things about you that you didn't even know were lovable. I love the fact that you're a wonderful mother. I love watching you read bedtime stories to the kids and tucking them in at night. I love the fact that you have been their rock in their world during some of the shittiest times in their lives. I love your smile. Even though you think your teeth are crooked, I love and am infatuated with your feet, even though you think they're your worst feature. And I really love how uncoordinated you are when painting your toenails and manage to get just as much polish on the bathroom floor as you do on your toenails. Darla giggled at that last one, but also had tears in her eyes. I love the way it feels lying next to you in bed, naked, with our flesh melting into one. I love the fact that you snore, ever so slightly, even though you vehemently insist you don't. I love the fact that you work so damned hard at Callahan's because it is the first real job you've ever had, and you like showing the guys you can work just as hard as them, if not harder. I love the way you smell when you come home from work, even when you're all hot and sweaty. Gross. I couldn't feel any less sexy than when I get home from Callahan's. I don't care. I have no idea what it is, but there are fewer times when I desire you more. You're weird, she said, leaning in for a kiss. I love that you think I'm weird and actually have the brass to tell me. I love how you look when you come to bed dressed only in one of my t-shirts, and that I'd rather see you in that than the most expensive lingerie. But most of all, I love the fact that you chose me. I just hope I can live up to it and prove that you made the right decision. Oh, Dalton, she said, hugging me and crying softly. You've made me so happy. I want to marry you, Darla. I want you to be my wife and my lover. I want your children to become my children, and I want you to be the mother of our future children. I want to live with you, laugh with you, and even argue with you sometimes because I know we can handle it and become stronger through it. Will you have me? Will you make one more good decision and take me as your husband? Yes. Oh God, yes. I love you so much. I love you so very, very much. I love you too, soon to be Mrs. Darla Anderson. I didn't give Darla a ring that night. I wanted to keep with the theme of allowing Darla to grow and gain more control over the direction of her life. Instead, I gave her a budget that I was comfortable with, around $4,000, which still just about blew her away. Me too, for that matter, and still allowed us to set a reasonable budget for a modest wedding the following summer. In short, I wanted Darla to choose a ring that she liked, one that fit her style and personality, and one that she would feel comfortable and confident wearing for the next 5 or 6 decades. We chose to have a fire-themed wedding where I simply wore my dress uniform, especially since Danny Larson was my best man and the groomsmen were all co-workers from RRFFD. I thought all the law enforcement and firefighters looked pretty sharp in their dress uniforms. Natalie and Nathan served as a junior bridesmaid and ring bearer, of course. At the end of the ceremony, we all filed out of the Methodist church I grew up in and were whisked away on the old, beautifully restored open-cab Seagrave fire engine that belonged to our firefighters union. It had belonged to the Red River Falls Fire Department back in the late 1920s and 30s and was painstakingly brought back to her former glory by our members. Darla looked absolutely stunning in a simple silver sleeveless knee-length dress. It had a low neckline with an open back and thoroughly accentuated her ample cleavage and her gorgeous hips. She might as well have been wearing a sign that read, "Danger, curves ahead." She had also started a 5-alarm fire in my loins that would only be doused during our consummation that night. Darla's side of the bridal party had included Diana, Meg, and Misty, whom she had gotten very close to. Diana and I had hit a pretty rough patch while Darla and I were on the outs last year. Diana had done everything she could to nudge Darla and I back together, at least as friends if not as a couple. I hadn't always been very nice to her either, especially since she was there for me right after Darla had left me. She had been one of my closest friends for the longest time, and I had been too much of a jackass to realize she had been in my corner all along. I helped Darla navigate her way to her seat on the old fire engine so she wouldn't trip in her heels. Natalie and Nathan stood behind the seat in the hose bed as there were rails they could hold on to. We wouldn't be driving very fast in the old engine. I turned around and waved to all of the guests who were still blowing bubbles and tossing bird seed at us. I saw Diana standing there, holding her small bouquet, and I deliberately walked over to her and bear hugged her. "I love the friggin' shit out of you. You know that, right?" I said into her ear as I hugged her. I know, was her teary response. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for you. Damned right you wouldn't, she said, laughing and hugging me even tighter. Thank you for everything, I said as I pulled away from her embrace. My pleasure. Now go take your wife and kids for a fire truck ride. You perpetual little boy. My wife and kids. My heart swelled as those words rang in my ears and sounded so good. I took Darla's hand in my own as I maneuvered the old engine into the street in our own little parade of fire trucks. One of our reserve pumpers and backup aerial ladder truck from RRFFD also joined the parade, along with a reserve pumper and backup tanker from the Royal Fork Fire and Rescue, all of which also carried or were driven by respective members of the wedding party. We toured the city, honking and occasionally blaring the sirens, and were escorted by members of the Mason County Sheriff's Department, courtesy of Sheriff Pat Quinn, who drove his SUV with lights flashing to allow our little convoy safe passage through some stoplight intersection. I imagine Red River PD didn't care for our entourage, but I didn't really care either. This was our day, and we wanted it to be memorable. Some citizens in the community would probably bitch and moan, too, but Chief Van Dyke had approved it, so long as we reimbursed the fuel usage, which was no big deal for a 25 to 30-minute cruise. As we drove down the main drag through Red River Falls, I was as happy and content as I had ever been. You know what the best part of all of this is, Dalton? My lovely bride asked. What's that, my love? We effectively killed the theory. What theory is that? She squeezed my hand and said, the theory that nice guys finish last. They don't. And the icing on the cake is that, sometimes, even nice girls finish first, too. You did it, you know? You kept your promise. Even when I said that it wasn't going to be a race, you were patient and waiting for me at the finish line. Just like you said. It's funny in a way. You rescue and save people for a living. And you literally saved me. I'd die for you and the kids. There isn't anything I wouldn't do for you. And me for you, she said with a quick kiss. I love you, Dalton. I love you too, Mrs. Anderson. Just like the silver bell on the old fire truck, her new name definitely had a nice ring to it. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.